Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. Today we're going to be starting a new series where we look at cleric spells by level, and I talk about which ones I like, which ones I don't like, which ones I think are maybe overrated or underrated, or might be situationally good. I did a similar series with warlocks. I think that one was 4 parts, and at that time somebody had requested me to do the cleric one, so of course I didn't, and so I'm getting around to it now. Now, I could pretend that it's because I was waiting for Tashes to find out what new spells we got, but the truth is I just kind of was like, hey, that's a great idea, and then immediately forgot about it. But I remember now, so here we go. So this one's probably going to be at least a 5-part series, I think. We're going to cover Cantrips, 1st and 2nd level spells in today's video. We'll go 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and then we'll probably have a video for 6th to 9th. And then we'll do domain spells, which will probably be like, there's a lot of cleric domains, so I think that's going to be a 2-parter. We'll do like Player's Handbook domains, and then we'll probably do all the other domains, or something like that. That one might even be 3 parts, who knows? There's a lot of cleric domains. Obviously, we're not going to go through every single spell, because that will take forever, but I will talk about which ones I like and why, and which ones I maybe don't like and why, right? But before we get going, I just want to say all this is just my opinion. You might agree, disagree, that's fine. And a lot of it is going to depend on your own personal experiences. Sometimes it can change depending on like party composition, right? Some spells are really good in certain party mixes and less good in others, right? Maybe it depends on your DM, because he just doesn't like summoning spells or something like that, and just always tries to screw you over when you try to get those kind of spells, right? In which case those kind of spells aren't going to be great pickups, you know? But in general, these are going to be my thoughts on the different ones. So we'll start with cantrips. Now we'll start with my favorite cantrip for clerics in the entire game, Guidance. And the reason I love Guidance is because it's so flexible. The fact that you can cast it on yourself or someone else is really handy. The fact that it just applies to checks of that ability. So if you cast it on Dex, like, it could apply to initiative, because initiative is a dexterity check, right? So, I mean, in the campaign I'm currently running right now, we have an artificer, and he has guidance. And he casts guidance on himself every time they're about to open a door in a dungeon, because he might get in a fight. He wants to have the bonus D4. And, I'm fine with that. If I had the supernatural ability in real life to enhance my speed and agility, I would use that every time I thought I was going to get in a fight too. So some people might be, oh, isn't that kind of lame that he does it like 50 times a day? It's like, maybe, but, it's a cantrip. That's what it's there for. If they didn't want him to have guidance 50 times a day, they should have made it a 1st level spell. Either way, guidance is excellent. And the fact that you can use it on, so many different circumstances, because ability checks are so common in this game, it's just a great spell. I mean, the only drawback is that you need to kind of know that something's coming up, because it does have limited duration. I think it's 1 minute. And, if you cast enhanced or guidance to enhance the rogue's dexterity, and it turns out they needed intelligence, then, kind of out of luck on that case. But in general, it's just an amazing spell. It's quite flexible, and it's just a great solid choice. So, attack cantrips. I figured I'd mention Sacred Flame and Toll the Dead. Both very similar. Of course, Sacred Flame is radiant, Toll the Dead is necrotic. I generally prefer Toll the Dead because it does more damage if the creature's already wounded. But I will say that in Sacred Flame's defense, while neither radiant or necrotic are heavily resisted or immune as a damage type, necrotic is more commonly immune. There are a lot more undead, and you're much more likely to be fighting undead that are immune to necrotic than you will be fighting like angels that are immune to radiant, right? So there is some ground regained by Sacred Flame, but in general I find that Toll the Dead is fine. I will say that if I'm like a 1st level cleric, I'm not taking both, right? I'm just going to take the 1 damage cantrip I want, and I'm going to go with that, right? But if I'm higher level, grabbing both isn't so bad, right? Once you start getting more cantrips, having a 2nd damage type is pretty handy. And I like them both because they're good on like any type of cleric. Like if I'm playing like say a light cleric and I get the cantrip bonus damage, I'm probably going to be casting quite a few cantrips, and having that spammable damage source is really nice. But even if I'm playing like a war cleric, and really all I want to do is just get up in somebody's face and hit them with my greatsword, right? That's all I want to do, is hit people in the face with a greatsword. And don't bother me with healing. I'm a war cleric. That is my job. It's right there in the description. Then sometimes though it turns out that they're too far away and I can't hit them in the face with my greatsword. And then having a ranged cantrip is pretty nice. Because sure, I could have dashed in the first round, but I didn't get to hit anybody that way. At least this way I can move my movement, hit them with my spell, and then next round I can get into the melee and hit them in the face with the greatsword. Also, maybe I get poisoned and now I have disadvantage on my attack roll, or I have disadvantage for some other reason, right? As long as I'm not blinded. Obviously, if I have to target them, then I'm still screwed. But, maybe I have disadvantage. And now I have disadvantage on my attack roll, but neither one of these require an attack roll. They just hit automatically, and the opponent gets a saving throw for 0 damage or full damage, depending on whether they pass or fail. So that's not affected by me being poisoned, right? I still get to hit them. Maybe they're under partial cover or something, right? And now it's going to be harder to hit them with some sort of ranged attack or whatever, right? And I can hit them with the cantrip still because I can still see them. So I think for those kind of purposes, they're really good. And, nothing wrong with either one of those choices. Light, back in the day when all you really had for races were humans, halflings, dwarves, and elves, light was almost mandatory because the humans and I think halflings didn't have dark vision back then either. They definitely don't now. But I don't think they did back then either. So, half the races didn't have any way of seeing the dark, and it's either light spell or constant use of torches. And torches took up your hands. You can't use a great sword while you've got a torch in one hand. Come on. So, light was almost mandatory. Granted, back then it was also a first level spell. These days, I find that there's so many races and so many of them have dark vision that having an entire party with dark vision is actually not that uncommon. But even still, even just looking at just the basic races from the player's handbook, still have humans and the variant human, obviously. You have halflings, you have dragonborn don't have dark vision for some reason. So, there are still some races that don't, and you probably want somebody in the party that has it. Now, does that mean that you and the wizard both need to have it? Probably not. You just need one guy with it, right? But if nobody else has it, it's a good pickup. Word of Radiance is one I like quite a bit, especially if I'm on more of a front line focus, like that War Cleric we mentioned. Now I can hit multiple guys with an AoE spell. It's only a 5-foot range, so it's not really big radius. But, I can still hit multiple targets maybe. The damage scales, right? It's only a d6, but like all the other cantrips, it's scaling with levels 5 and 11 and 17, right? So there is something there. There's no friendly fire. I get to designate which targets I hit. So, it's actually pretty decent. So it's one that, depending on what style of cleric I'm playing, I might want to look towards. Lastly, I wanted to mention Spare the Dying. And again, it's not that this is a bad cantrip, but it's definitely one that I think is often overrated. And I made that mistake myself. When I first read the spell, I was like, man, this spell's great. But as you play the game a little bit more, you start to realize that stabilizing somebody from bleeding out is better than not stabilizing them and letting them bleed out, obviously. But it's just nowhere near as good as healing them back up and getting them back in the fight. And when you've got things like Cure Wounds, Healing Word, both first level spells, you could have a healer's kit, you could give them a healing potion. And healing potions are on standard equipment list. They're available for purchase in almost any town or city, So it's not like these are some crazy rare item or something like that. Or only high level players are going to have access to a healing potion, they're just super common. And all of those effects are way better because they don't just stop the guy from bleeding out. They also get him back in the fight again. And that's just way better. And one of the reasons I think it's overrated is I actually just recently, I think 2 or 3 days ago, when I was preparing for this video, I saw a website that listed the 10 best cleric spells in the entire game. And their number 1 pick was Spare the Dying. I kid you not, number 1 was Spare the Dying. And I was like, how did they pick this over Healing Word? That's insane to me. But anyways, enough on Spare the Dying. It's not that it's a terrible spell. Having it on your spell list as a cantrip, it's not bad. It's just, if you have healing potions or healing kits or spell slots, all those things are way better. So anyways, let's move on to the first level spells. And the first ones I want to talk about are Bless and Bane. I've talked about these spells in other videos, so if I've already, if I'm repeating myself, I apologize. But there are new people all the time, so they might not know my opinion on them. And my opinion is that Bless is way better than Bane. He's just way better. That's not the Bane is bad either, though. Bane's kind of like a mid-rank spell, in my opinion. And we will talk about one situation where Bane can sometimes be better. But in general, like 95% of the time, I prefer Bless. And the reason is because there's no saving throw. So Bane, I can hit 3 targets, but what if 1, 2, or 3... excuse me, sorry. What if 1, 2, or 3 of them make their saving throw? Now I've just wasted the spell slot and it's done nothing, right? But even if, let's say none of them do, right? Let's say they all fail. Bless was going to take effect no matter what, right? As long as I have 3 allies to cast Bless on, possibly including myself, they're all going to get the benefit, right? It's also going to enable me to maintain concentration on the spell more easily because both of them require concentration. But Bless is going to help me to maintain concentration on Bless. Bane is not going to help me unless it causes them to miss me, which it could, right? So there is that. I'm not saying it's all bad. I'm just saying that Bless is guaranteed, right? I buff my allies, there's no saving throw, it's going to take effect. It's also going to last for basically the entire fight. So if I cast Bane on 3 guys, and then the Paladin crits the guy and decides to drop his highest level smite on him, and 1-shots the guy, or 2-shots the guy, and he never got to attack, never even got to do anything, then Bane didn't really do anything in that fight, right? The guy didn't even get a chance to do anything, and he's already dead. That could have been an ally that was blessed, and that ally will be blessed for the entire duration of the fight. Assuming I don't lose concentration or whatever, right? But in general, I just think Bless is better. However, there is some nice things with Bane, which is that you can use it with an ally to set up a better crowd control effect spell. So maybe I cast Bane on them to lower their saving throws, and then the wizard casts Hypnotic Pattern, or a Fear, or Evard's Black Tentacles, or something like that, right? And now we're able to crowd control a bunch of these guys, and because they have Bane on them, it's more likely that they're going to fail those saving throws. And especially in something like, say, a hold person, where they get a saving throw every single round, right, at the end of their turn, now it's going to be much more likely that that spell stays on them, because they're going to have that Bane spell just debuffing them, right? And I think that under those circumstances, Bane can start to shine a lot more. It's just usually Bless is better. So let's talk about Cure Wounds. And Cure Wounds is a fine spell. You know, if you're like a life cleric and you have it on your domain spell list, you're probably going to be perfectly happy with that. Nothing wrong with it. But you already know what I'm going to say. And that's that Healing Word is just better. And yeah, okay, Healing Word only heals a D4 plus the mod, rather than a D8 plus the mod. And if you're trying to like upscale it to get a lot of healing on somebody, then Cure Wounds is going to be way better, right? Like if the target's not dead and unconscious or anything like that, well, dead wouldn't help, but unconscious, and you're just like, okay, the fighter just got crit, he's down to like 7 hit points, we really don't want this guy to go down, so I'm going to cast Cure Wounds on him, and I'm going to need a 4th level spell slot. That's probably going to be a lot better because you're trying to stop him from going down in the first place, right? As opposed to a Healing Word. But in general, Healing Word is just better because it has a range and it requires a bonus action rather than your full action. And that means that you're able to hit somebody in the face with your greatsword. I mean, you are a war cleric. Come on. You're supposed to be making war, not healing your allies. If your fighter knew how to fight, he wouldn't go down in the first place, right? His job is to be a fighter. It's right there in his name. And he can't even do that properly. He needs you to go save him. I mean, come on. Pick it up a notch. That's all we're saying, fighter. I'm supposed to be hitting people in the face with a greatsword. You're supposed to be doing the same thing. And I'm doing my job. And with Healing Word, I can still bring you back up and get you back in the fight. But with Cure Wounds, now I had to give up hitting somebody in the face with a greatsword just so I could heal you. I mean, come on. Terrible. Call yourself a fighter. Moving on. Detect Magic. Oh, actually, Healing Word. Let's mention Healing Word. We already kind of talked about it. Not much more to say. I love that spell. It's probably the best healing spell in the entire game, given the level range that it's available at. Yeah, like healing word and stuff like that, or power word heal. Like those spells are insanely good too. Not trying to take anything away from them, but given that this is a first level spell, it's just so much better than all the competition. The reason why Spare the Dying and Cure Wounds aren't better spells is because Healing Word exists. So anyways, moving on, Detect Magic. It's a ritual spell. It's nice to be able to find out if there's magic items that you could have found and taken with you. Instead, you left them hidden in some secret compartment because the rogue sucks at his job and couldn't find it. Man alive, what kind of a party are you even in? Fighters that can't fight, rogues that can't rogue. The only person doing his job is your war cleric. You're on it. But it's pretty good. If you have a wizard with Detect Magic, it's probably better on him because their ritual casting is not going to need a spell slot. But if you don't have one, then, you probably want it. Guiding Bolt. I like Guiding Bolt quite a bit at low levels. It doesn't scale particularly well. Like all the damage spells, it scales like this. Well, unless your hit points are scaling like that. So it doesn't really keep pace. But it's a nice ranged damage spell. There's a bit of scaling in there. And of course it has this rider effect where the next attack against that target gets advantage. And depending on who the next target is, or the next person attacking is, that can be really good. Now maybe it's the wizard who's just going to cast a firebolt for 1d10 damage. I mean, better than nothing, I guess. But maybe it's the rogue. And now he gets to sneak attack because he has advantage. And he has double the chance of critting and doubling up on all those crit dice damage. And or sneak dice damage. And that's pretty good. Or maybe it's the paladin. And now you doubled his chances of landing a giant smite crit. So depending on the initiative order and who's going to be attacking next, it can be really, really advantageous. The problem is you can't really plan for that. You don't get to designate who's going to get advantage on the attack. It's just the next person that attacks this guy gets it, So, not bad, not great. I do think that it can be pretty decent though. And with combined, like I've seen a war cleric use it combined with their channel divinity to give themselves a +10. So you're fighting a knight who was in full plate mail and had a shield and had, I think the guy had like 21 armor class or something like that, right? And so the war cleric decided to hit him with a guiding bolt. He missed, used his channel divinity to give himself the +10, landed that, and then the paladin was able to hit because he had advantage. And it was actually a pretty nice little combo, right? And the party was really struggling to hit this guy without it. So, at low levels, there can be that. So I don't think it's bad. Sanctuary, very nice spell to protect one of your allies, forces enemies to retarget somebody else. Pretty good to have. Shield of Faith, I like the spell a lot if I'm going to be up in the front lines a lot. The only problem with it is that because it uses my concentration, it means I can't be concentrating on something even better, right? So unlike, say, like a wizard who could have a mirror image on himself, which does not use his concentration, and then he's concentrating on a slow spell, or he's concentrating on that hypnotic pattern spell we mentioned, or whatever else, right? And now he has the mirror image to make it less likely he's going to get hit and lose concentration on the spell he really cares about. You don't really have that. If you could cast it on yourself, not use concentration, and just have the extra 2 armor class, and then let that protect a better spell, that'd be really nice. But as it is, it's still not bad, if you're playing your war cleric and you just want to hit guys with your greatsword, you getting hit less is actually pretty nice. And it means that that fighter in your party probably has worse armor class than you do now, just further emphasizing how bad he is at his job. Just disgraceful. Moving on to second level spells. And I've got a big list here to talk about, so we'll try to be a little quicker here. Aid, excellent buff spell. Scales fairly well, right? If you upcast it, your allies get more maximum hit points. It's not temporary hit points, but that's even better because then it stacks with temporary hit points. So quite a nice spell in my opinion. The fact that it has that 8-hour duration is awesome. Augury, a spell I don't see cast a lot, at least not at my table. But personally, I really like it. It's a ritual. It's like low-level divination, can kind of give me a hint. I mean, it's not really like a great divination spell, to be honest, but it's more like I'm about to do something. Is this a good idea, a bad idea? a bit of both or not important at all. And you could just ask your deity or some other extraplanar entity, is this good, bad, or a bit of both? And they'll be like, bit of both, or good or bad or whatever, right? And it gives your DM an excuse to help you out when you're in a tough spot without him having to feel guilty about it. You know, it kind of lets him off the hook. So I actually think it's a pretty decent spell. Continual Flame, a lot like Light, except it lasts forever. Now, it does cause a burning thing, which does not consume the original object. Maybe you don't want something to burn forever. Who knows? But I actually kind of like the spell. I think it's pretty good. Blindness, Deafness. The main thing that makes this debuff really nice is that it does not use your concentration. So you could blind an enemy caster and now he can't target you with spells, or you got some powerful hand-to-hand combatant thing like an ogre or something like that, for example, right? Although it does target constitution, so that can be rough. Ogre might not be the best example. But maybe you're fighting like some sort of dark elf and they're super high agility, dexterity type, but maybe not the highest con, right? Because they're puny little elves. They're weak and fragile and break under the force of your mighty greatsword swung by your war cleric. But, blinding them and basically giving them disadvantage on all their attacks is pretty nice. And it doesn't use a concentration, so even better. Deafness, part of it, not really so useful. I mean, you kind of pick one or the other, right? But maybe you're fighting something that's already blind, but has blind sense, in which case deafness can be pretty handy and basically just does what blindness would have done, right? Like I said, it is a con save, though, so that can be rough. A lot of monsters tend to have a good constitution. Silence. You don't have counter spell unless you're like an Order Domain Cleric. I guess they get it on the spell list. But in general, I think it's Order Domain. In general, clerics don't have good ways of shutting down enemy casters. And silence is one of the only ways you have to do that. I've even cast silence in like a small little room, but we were fighting this like really powerful like necromancer type thing. It wasn't an actual necromancer, but it was an enemy that had necromancer spells. But he was, of course, way higher level in the party. So I just felt like me trading my spells for his spells was a good deal. Because, even though our fighter can't fight very well, he doesn't care that he's been silenced. Maybe we have a barbarian, he doesn't care that he's been silenced. I mean, he might care a little bit because he probably wanted to rage and yell at the enemy and hurl insults at him, and the only language the barbarian knows because he's not particularly educated. But, he can still do that. It's just now nobody can hear him. But in general, silence is a pretty good spell. I like it a lot. Obviously, I want to mention Spiritual Weapon. Spiritual Weapon is an amazing spell. It's good whether or not you're that war cleric we've been making fun of so far today. But it's also good if you're like a ranged cleric and you don't want to be up in the front line. Because the Spiritual Weapon has its own movement. It can just float around the battlefield and attack people. You don't have to be up there with it. That's one of the best things about it, It doesn't use concentration. It uses your bonus action to attack, which you might not have had much to do with a bonus action anyways, right? Except for maybe a healing word. But now you have a reason to cast Cure Wounds instead, so it's all good still. In general, though, it's just a great spell. And it even upcasts fairly well. Like if I was like a 15th or 16th level cleric, am I going to use my 8th level spell slot for it? No. But I might use a 4th, because I'm essentially going to like double up the damage it does. And once I have lots of spell slots, 1 4th level spell slot every now and then isn't such a big deal. And I can still cast it with lower level spell slots too, it doesn't matter, right? But it scales decently well. It has a nice duration on it, no concentration. It's attacking with a bonus action, just free damage essentially. Nothing wrong with any of that. I wanted to talk about a couple of spells that I think are of questionable value. And the first is Prayer of Healing. And it's not that Prayer of Healing is bad per se. If you have a decent sized party, it's actually a fair amount of healing, right? So I'm not saying that that's bad, but it has a casting time of 10 minutes. And that's really where the problem is. You can't use it in combat because of the casting time. And if you had 10 minutes to sit around casting this spell, you probably had an hour to just make camp, break for lunch, and spend some hit dice. And I think that's really what my problem with it is that instead of using my spell slot and essentially taking a short rest, we could have just taken a short rest. That said, though, it is a decent amount of heals. Maybe the party was like in rough shape and you don't have enough hit dice, there are chances for it to be good. But compared to like Healing Spirits that Druid get, even though Healing Spirits has been nerfed, they've made several errata to it, it's still probably a better spell. But there are times when maybe you don't have an hour, but you do have 10 minutes. That kind of stuff happens, So it's not like I think it's terrible. I just don't think that it's great. I want to talk about Locate Object. This kind of falls in that same category. It's very situational, and it's really hard to justify using it in a lot of cases because it's just too situational. So while there are chances for it to really shine, it's just there's so many like circumstances that have to be met. I'm just not a big fan. Lastly, this is where we'll end things. I wanted to mention Find Traps, which is just an absolutely terrible spell. It's absolutely awful. And when you first read it, you might not even really think that it's that bad. Like, especially if you played back in the day, Find Traps was a pretty decent spell for first and second edition, right? But these days, if you look at it, it doesn't alert you to like non trap type hazards, right? So if there's a weak floor that's going to give out, but it wasn't specifically designed that way, it doesn't help you. The trap has to be within line of sight. So I mean, your rogue, who should be doing his job, could have just found the trap on his own if it's in line of sight. He should be searching for traps anyways. That's what he does. That's his only job. He's as bad as our fighter is. Man alive, what is with these party members? But he can just find the trap himself. If it's in line of sight, do I really need to use a second level spell slot to try to find the trap? It also doesn't really even tell me like where the trap is. It just notifies me that, oh yes, there is a trap within range. I mean, it's just not really great for a second level spell slot. I could have been casting Spiritual Weapon and hitting somebody in the face with a great sword and a spiritual weapon. I mean, so much better. That's really what we wanted to do. I'm the only person in this party doing their job, and my job does not include finding traps. That's the rogue's job. So overall, though, I just don't think it's a very good spell. But anyways, that's going to be part 1 of our Cleric series. Feel free to like, subscribe, do all the usual YouTube stuff. And most importantly, though, leave me your comments in the comment section. I look forward to reading what other people have to say about things. And maybe you've had better or worse experiences with some of the spells. Maybe you're like, hey, you never mentioned this spell. How come? Perfectly valid. But mostly I just love talking to people and hearing about their experiences or clever uses of different spells. Like, oh, we used a continual flame spell this once and we did this with it and lured guys into an ambush or whatever, right? Like, I love reading that kind of stuff because it always gives me ideas on things I could do with either my own player characters or the monsters if I'm DMing. And, you can, there's some really creative people out there and nothing wrong with stealing their ideas when they give them to us in the comments section. So anyways, that's everything I have for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.